How's everyone doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, as always, on Monday, January 20th, to recap everything that happened this weekend and even a little bit a couple hours ago, because there's a lot to get to on today's show. A lot of craziness over the weekend, a couple upsets, the Commanders getting one over the Detroit Lions, the Eagles barely escaping the Los Angeles Rams on Sunday, yesterday, and also, of course, we're going to talk about the main attraction, the Bills, beating the Baltimore Ravens just by 2 points and advancing to the AFC Conference Championship game. Also, like I mentioned a couple hours ago, there was some of the latest developments on Ben Johnson, where he will be coaching next season. That'll be towards the end of the show as well. So if you like, please stick around and watch all the great content that we have coming up for you guys on today's show. But before we get started, I'd like to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments you'd like to make, or also any opinions you'd like to share regarding anything around the NFL, please don't be hesitant to do so. Your input and insight is always a big part of what makes this show great. So again, please don't hesitate. Your perspective on anything really gives us a lot to talk about, but also, just get a different sense of what you guys are talking about and just thinking out there. So if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that just by using the new Super Chat feature. You're able to use the Super Chat feature just by clicking the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that I can see your message. I'll read it out loud, and that way bring the conversation to a different place potentially, or just get another point of view on anything that we're talking about. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. But with that being said, now we could start recapping. Today's going to be mostly recapping the games, considering that there was 4 over the weekend, and then as we go along, we'll preview next weekend, but also, talk a little bit more in depth on different talking points throughout the week from these last few games this past weekend. So, like I mentioned, we're going to recap mostly today, starting off with, I thought, the biggest attraction, and it was all but the close, nail-biting main event that we thought it would be. It was everything that we hoped for between the Ravens and the Buffalo Bills last night. But in the end, Buffalo got the win, 27-25, to advance to the Conference Championship game, a rematch of a few years ago when they took on the Kansas City Chiefs. Again, this one will take place in Kansas City once again. So the Bills are moving on. They grinded out a tough victory, but for Baltimore, it's mostly about really the just the failing to reach a conference championship game with Derrick Henry. After only a year ago, they hosted one without him, and then they bring one in. You'd think you'd get back to the same spot, but unfortunately for them, they fell one stage short of where they got to last year, with Lamar also now going to a postseason record of 3-5. And really, overall, I thought both teams showed familiar sights last night, showed things that we have become accustomed to a little bit regarding both of these two teams, right? With Buffalo getting contributions from everybody and controlling the pace of the game. That was a point that we mentioned last week, where I just valued how many guys the Bills could go to, right? It was a little bit of Keon Coleman, a little bit here or there. Khalil Shakir made an impact. A couple of times he went to Curtis Samuel. James Cook also, did the majority of the work in the open field, whereas Ray Davis scored and Ty Johnson also contributed as well. You got a little bit from each portion of your team, and it wasn't just so heavily based on one. And I thought there was a lot of value in that. And I thought the Bills did an excellent job of spreading the ball around and also, like I said, controlling the speed and tempo of the game as well. But for Baltimore, again, talking about familiar sights from both of these teams, for Baltimore, it was just more getting in their own way and just not being able to get over the kind of setbacks that they have in some of these big games, and they just kind of get back into it, but they're never really able to get over the hump after, digging themselves in a hole. And we saw it obviously with the turnovers and things like that, which we're going to talk about. But that was just my initial thought of it, just how we've seen a few instances where we've seen the Bills, control the pace of the game, but also the Ravens, they showed some good signs, but a lot of the times it's just them getting in their own way. And it looked like the start we thought we were going to get in this game with two great quarterbacks and the Baltimore Ravens starting off with a touchdown to Rashad Bateman, then the Bills answering with a touchdown from Ray Davis. And then from there, we got a couple of these big moments where you're in these big games and you're so heavily matched that you need to win these big moments or just avoid the kind of setbacks that you would put yourself in, right? If you're not winning these big moments and if it's very much, even throughout the rest of the matchup, just don't be the team to kind of set yourself back, right? Because the Bills are already trying to do that and they don't need any help from the Ravens, to kind of get an advantage. So I thought we got 3 instances where we saw a lot of these big moments, big plays that the Ravens are going to look back on and think that, what if this turned out differently? We could have probably won this game. And the first one came when the Ravens were in their second drive of the game and Lamar threw an interception on the second play of that drive. And even though Buffalo only punted after that, that was still, pretty early to kind of make a mistake like that. But they were pretty fortunate in the moment to not have anything, damage the game plan, early on. The Bills only punted after that. And then a few plays later, Lamar fumbled on their next drive and Von Miller returned it to their 24-yard line. So after the Bills punted it back to them, Lamar fumbled once again, and now the Bills are in scoring position after Von Miller returned it. And this time, Buffalo do get a score, and they score a 1-yard touchdown by Josh Allen and take the lead 14-7. And after this, with the momentum now on Buffalo's side, Baltimore faced their largest halftime deficit after allowing Josh Allen to score his second touchdown right before halftime to make it 21-10. So all season, the Ravens had not been in a double-digit deficit going into halftime. So already in unfamiliar territory in the worst moment to have your first experience being down this much in the entire season. So that's one thing. But despite that, Baltimore got a field goal. Then, to me, their best drive, the best moment of this game for them, in contention with that final drive by Lamar, but I still thought this was the best they looked, was when Derrick Henry scored on their second drive, I believe, of the second half, and they cut the lead down to 21-19. In that drive, I felt like the Ravens really looked like the team that nobody wants to play, like the team that they're supposed to be, and I was a little bothered that Derrick Henry only got 16 carries, and I know it didn't really factor too much into it because of how close it was, but I'm feeling that Derrick should have had a lot more than just 16 carries, and maybe the pace and the way the game laid itself out was, a result of that, but I don't know. It just doesn't sit well with me for Derrick to finish this game with 16 carries. I feel like he was brought in to do more, so that's one thing. But he did score in this drive, and I thought the Ravens were going to try and snatch back the momentum in this moment. But the Bills go down into the red zone again, but they failed to score a touchdown this time, so they only got a field goal. And now it's 24-19, with the Ravens still having an opportunity to do something in this game. But Baltimore couldn't really take advantage of that because they had the other big moment in this game where Mark Andrews fumbled at midfield and the Bills got the ball back. So that was a pretty big, punch to the gut, really, at that moment, because I saw him fumble and I'm thinking, wow, like the Bills are about to end this game. But again, fortunately for the Ravens, their defense stood tall and the Bills only got 3 points. So now it's 27-19. You're really at the limit of how many points you could allow after this. So Baltimore had about 3 minutes to go, and they were able to get a touchdown, right? They were so efficient with it that they got it still with maybe over a minute left in the game by the time they scored that touchdown. But they went to Mark Andrews again, and of course, I'm pretty sure most of you guys saw it. The dropped 2-point attempt that obviously was failed. It was kind of tough for Mark Andrews because he was backpedaling and it was a little low, so it kind of looked like it bounced off of his knee a little bit. But I'm not saying he shouldn't have caught it. Absolutely, he should have caught it, but I'll cut him a little bit of slack there. But still, it was a brutal moment again for Mark Andrews to drop that 2-point conversion, especially after they previously tried a 2-point attempt on the Derrick Henry touchdown, but it was tipped at the line of scrimmage. So you desperately needed this one, and it didn't go. And then the Bills run out the clock, and that's the ball game basically. So looking back on it, it's hard not to look at the 2 turnovers by Lamar Jackson, especially with their narrative around Lamar and the lack of playoff success, especially against the Bills and especially against the Kansas City Chiefs, and just getting over the hump. It's hard not to look at Lamar and put a lot of the blame on him, or especially Mark Andrews too, with the 2 mistakes that he had. But I still think it shouldn't take too much away from how good the Bills were. You got to give them a lot of credit as well, because they were very effective all throughout the game, right? Josh Allen was only sacked once. Really, we didn't hear too much from Madubuike, Owe, Kyle Van Noy, those guys. We didn't really hear too much from them. Josh Allen got sacked only once, and they did very well to start drives, not get themselves into 3rd and longs. They ran the ball with a couple of guys, like I mentioned, as one of the key points to kind of wearing that defense down. And Josh Allen was also 8 of 9 on first downs as well. So they did a very excellent job of staying true to their game plan. Like I said, keeping tempo and keeping the pace of the game in their advantage. They also won the time of possession battle as well. So they did their part. But, I thought that obviously the turnovers played a big part in it, especially with the Bills defense, that they're not really going to get a lot of 3 and outs. I'm pretty sure the Ravens only punted 1 time, if that. So you could see where you might think that the Ravens are still a more talented team, and it's hard to argue with that, but the turnovers played very much into this Bills defense favor. That's how they make a living, off of their turnovers, being opportunistic and preying on the mistakes of the other teams. And even though they might be outmatched, man to man, they rely a lot on those turnovers. And the Ravens knew that, obviously. It's not like they were careless with the football. No one's really careless with the football. It's just that, in these moments where you got to have it potentially, or you feel like there's a lot riding on this game, obviously, you try to do a little bit too much, and that's usually what ends up costing you. And I thought Lamar was trying to do a little bit too much on that fumble that he created, and also the interception. It just seemed like a miscommunication, and against the best teams, those kind of silly mistakes usually end up costing the most. So they're certainly going to be kicking themselves over this. A lot of people had the Ravens moving on, and a lot of people felt like it was Lamar's year. But, I just felt like Buffalo at home, they were just not given enough credit. I feel like they're a very good team, and I don't know, it just felt like the Bills had enough of a sense of what kind of team they were, and they executed their game plan perfectly. And the biggest thing about it was that they didn't turn the ball over. So they are moving on to face the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City next week. It should be one of the many great games that these 2 teams have had, but we're still a long ways away from that. For the time being, we're going to continue to recap these games. The next one is coming up in the NFC. The Eagles got a big win over the Rams yesterday. A close one, but still the Eagles proved why they're such a good team, riding behind their best player on their team, Saquon Barkley. So we're going to go over that when we return after this break.